In the 20th century we saw a reappearance of the old pre-Christian European religions, with religions like Odinism and Hellenism and the important one for today Rodnovjerje, also known in English as the Slavic native faith. Though Rodnovjerje is based on the belief in Veles, Perun, Yarilo and all other Slavic gods. Branches can be found in every Slavic country today. The biggest one by far is in Russia, followed by Ukraine and then Poland. One specific thing is that there is no central branch. You have to be genealogically Slavic to join most Rodnovjerje branches. There are some exceptions to that. But the religion is not the theme of today, but one specific man whose ideas influenced a lot of today's working of the religion. That man is Alexei Alexandrovich Dobrovolsky, also known as Dobroslav. He was a Russian neo-pagan, founder of the Russian branch of Rodnovjerje, and a Soviet dissident, who spent 13 years of his life in labor camps. He called his ideology Russian National Socialism. Yes, exactly the kind you are thinking of. Born on October 1938 in Moscow to a Zaporizhian Cossack father and a native Muscovite mother, Alexei lost his father very early. He was raised by his mother, an engineer by profession and a Stalinist by conviction. He grew up in an atmosphere for admiration for Stalin and everything that was connected to him. The exposure of Stalin was a huge life shock for him because he was a true believer. So after Nikita Khrushchev not so secret speech denouncing Stalin and his crime against the Soviet people, he became a dissident. I mean, it's better late than never, but you would think that when your neighbors are unexpectedly moving to Siberia, that something was wrong. Then he left the Young Communist League in protest. The anti-communist uprising in Hungary had a huge influence on him. He formed the Russian National Socialist parties from workers in the defense of the factories in Moscow, with the goal of overthrowing the communist government and, in his own words, reviving the Russian nation. The group engaged in dangerous activities such as distributing leaflets. So of course, after this horrendous act of terrorism in 1958, the group was arrested and he was sentenced to 3 years in labor camp. Thank God we don't do that anymore in Europe, because this is 1958, there was a lot of Nazi officials and collaborators in the same camps. So Alexei found a couple of new friends, like associates of General Krasnov, Kurov, Andrei Vlasov. Under their influence, first he became a monarchist. Also, after serving some time in the Dubrovnik camp in Mordovia, he met Arseniev Hoffman, who was again a member of a secret, not so secret, Russian-German society in the pre-war years. So from him, Alexei got his first knowledge about the fate of his ancestors and the role of the Nordic race. During one interview later in his life, he said about what he had learned in the camp system from his new friends that none of them has ever seen or heard of gas chambers or crematorium. So if ever there was any crematorium of somebody, it was of those who died of infectious disease. And gas chambers were disinfection chambers for the destruction of the typhus lices. The Holocaust is a big scam of the 20th century, as Einstein's theory of relativity and the Yankee landing on the moon. Those are his words. He was released in 1961. In the same year he was baptized by dissident priest Gleb Yakuni, who also became the godfather for his children. In the beginning of 1964 he joined the Union of Working People that was led by Boris Edikinov, but the Soviet government is always on their toes regarding dangerous organizations. They arrested all 4 members and put them in a psychiatric hospital, something that was very common in the Soviet Union regarding dissidents and even in today's Russia. If I make another video about some dissidents, you will see that it is a recurring theme. In the hospital he met a fellow Soviet dissident and a human rights activist Vladimir Bukovsky and General Petro Grigorenko. In 1965 he was released and then he got into contact with the National Alliance of Russian Solidarists, also known as the NTS. They were an anti-communist organization organization created in the 30s in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia in the capital Belgrade by white emigrants. They actually were active with their anti-communist actions. Through Alexei they transferred a duplicate machine to a dissident poet Yuri Galanskov. The next year Alexei officially joined the NTS. Through him they compiled the White Book and the Phoenix 66. Those were documents of trials and labor camps that were sent to the West. So in 67 he was arrested again. The trial was called the Trial of the Four, and sadly Alexei then played the snitching card and testified against his comrades and himself. So he only got 2 years. All 4 defendants were charged with Article 70 of the Soviet Criminal Code, meaning anti-Soviet agitation and propaganda. Ginsburg was charged, he got 7 years and he died in a labor camp. Galanskov was charged with editing and he got 5 years. Lashkova was charged with assisting, she only got 1 year. Regarding the trial, Anatoly Glasnov-Levitin wrote in his memoirs the most sensational news was the surrender of Alexei Dobrovolsky. People were very disappointed and well, his comrades were no longer his comrades. So many people would think that this would be the end for Dobrovolsky, but no, we are not even halfway through. In 68 his grandmother and mother died and left him with a small fortune. When the next year he was released, he sold all his family fortune. With the money he bought an entire library and dived into the esoteric world of Helena Blavatsky. So after 3 years he finally got a permit to move to Moscow and also got interested in Slavic paganism. So for 14 years he studied it and also he traveled around villages and well pretended to be a sorcerer. So in the second half of the 1980s, with the beginning of Perestroika, he joined the patriotic association Pamyat. The group then splintered between the Orthodox and the pagans, and Alexei of course went with the pagans, and the group was the World of Anti-Zionist and Anti-Masonic Front Pamyat. In 89 he took part in the creation of the Moscow Slavic pagan community headed by Alexander Belov, which later became known as Rodnoveria. And then he took on the pagan name of Dobroslav at the age of 51. In the 1990s, Dobroslav moved to Vasenovo. There he did his pagan teachings and did also his pagan ceremonies and rituals. And during those ceremonies there were a lot of drinking and destruction of Orthodox icons. The interesting thing was that they did drink beer, but they were against vodka. They only used vodka to, let's say, start a fire. They got drunk and then they pour it into the fire. In an interview in 1992, he said that every Russian is a pagan in his soul. He would ask people who were raised an atheist, do you love nature? They would say yes, and he would say, then you are a pagan. And also he said that thinking people were drawn to it because of spiritual emptiness left by the collapse of the Soviet Union. In the same interview, Dobrovolsky also performed a ceremony of unbaptizing of new members by removing what he called the blasphemy of Christianity, by washing away the holy water by baptizing in pure lake water. After unbaptizing them, he placed a large wooden ring on the head of each new member to guard them against evil spirits. He then cut a small lock of their hair, symbolizing clan or lineage, and threw it into the fire, which was a special fire. It was special because they didn't lit it with matches, but with the sun's rays through a glass. Each member then got a new old Slavic name, like Dobrovolsky has his Dobroslav. So during the 90s he was visited by a lot of famous and important people, like activists and neo-pagans. For his insight, he also gave lectures. He also went to Moscow from Vasenovo a couple of times to give lectures. I mean, he was trying to get into politics. So Moscow is the obvious place to go, although in the end it wasn't successful. So again in 2002 he ended up in court for anti-Semitism. He got 2 years of suspended imprisonment. The fun fact is that the local communist newspaper stood up for him because apparently nobody likes the Jews. In 2005, number of his pamphlets were declared as extremist material because I guess literature is dangerous. But it's always good to see that Russia is fighting against extremism. And on May 19, 2013, Dobroslav died. He wasn't buried, but he had funeral rite by burning his body in a fire, in the ways of the old Slavic pagan traditions. Now let's see what Dobroslav had on his mind, and let me just say it was a lot. So he believed that Aryans, white people, came from Hyperborea, which is a mythical ancient continent in the north, which was the era of the matriarchy, in which the mother was not the boss, but was a divinity. So the mother is the head of the family, is the keeper of order and customs, and she leads the secret rituals. She is the medium between our and the spiritual world. When that era ended, the era of man started, and that is looked upon as a regression. So the basis of his modern ideology is the sun disk, which is represented by only one initial Slavic deity, Yarilo. In Dobroslav's own words, these are the gods of the sun, not the sun god, and this is called henotheism. So all the holidays were built around the rotation of the sun, as it was the main force of his religious belief. In an ideological sense, he was a national socialist, and he called it pagan socialism. The pagan part represented people, homeland, and nature, and the socialism part was traced back to the Russian peasant socialism, as he would call it, which included complete social equality, equalization, division of property, voluntarily self-restriction, and did not recognize the right of private property. He also was a strong proponent of vegetarianism, which he combined with esotericism. The man sounds like a hippie, by saying that animals were domesticated by the Jews to use in blood sacrifices. Alright, maybe an anti-Semitic hippie. He described the Jews as parasites, as hostile to nature and the indigenous people of the land. Dobroslav also believed that monotheism was born in the barren desert of the Middle East and was never made to fit the Slavic population, which was surrounded by the myriad gods of the woods, forests, and lakes. Even the Slavic word for God, which is Bog, is not of Slavic origin. So he considered that the Jewish Christian alienation from nature and the church justification for social inequalities are unacceptable, though he wrote about the unnatural mixing of races and blamed the international Jewish Christianity for this crime. He viewed the Slav as a special race suffering from oppression by the God's chosen people. He saw the idea of the God's chosen people as a model for the extermination of the native peoples. He wrote that Yarilo, the sun, burned those who are impure, mainly Jews. Apparently not even the sun likes the Jews. Basically it was good honest Slavs against the spawn of Satan, Jews. In his opinion, the civil war, which split the people into communists and the nobility, began not in 1918 but in 988, when the church committed a terrible betrayal of national interest by making an alliance with the Tartars, which helped to strengthen the church. His number one enemy was Prince Vladimir Sviatoslavic, who he said was of Jewish Khazar origin, and because of that he introduced Christianity to the Russian people, a weapon of enslavement of Aryans by the Jews. Dobroslav himself didn't believe in Perun and the other gods because he believed that they were placed in Kiev by Prince Vladimir to discredit the pagans by blood sacrifices and prepare the people for Christianity. An interesting thing is that he said that National Bolshevism and Eurasianism are part of the Russian spirit and that an alliance should be made by patriotic communists and national socialists. And that was why, because he was of the opinion that the Bolshevik revolution was part of the Russian soul and fought against the urban bourgeoisie, which represented capitalism, which came from Christianity and was opposed to Marxism. And that shouldn't be that weird, because in the beginning I said that he was really fond of Stalin when he was young. He saw the salvation of the Slavic people by returning to the core of the bright pagan worldview and highly moral attitudes of the ancients to relation to Mother Nature. Many of Dobroslav's teachings influenced modern Rodnoveria and neo-paganism in general, such as the pagan socialism, the battle between Slavs and Judeo-Christians, introductions of blood sacrifices by Jews, anti-natural activities, and the racism of the Old Testament, the activity of Prince Vladimir of introducing Christianity, and the inevitable battle between Slavs and their enemies, and the final victory for the Slavic peoples. Also, an important thing is that Dobroslav started using the kolorad, the sun symbol of Slavic neo-pagans, which is today the symbol of many Slavic pagan groups and nationalist groups and just pagan groups and all kinds of combination. Even the idea of combining the patriotic communist and the national socialist is popular in some circles, although that isn't his original idea. So in the end, we can say that we can see his influence even today, because many of his writings are still very popular in Slavic circles, and even when he was alive, many neo-pagans, national socialists, political activists from all kinds of political spectrums and religious spectrums came to him for his insight and blessings. So I will end this video with my favorite Dobroslav quote that I found in an interview researching for this video. "He who does not drink is not a sorcerer."
Пошел по улицам гулять, его поймали, арестовали и приказали расстрелять. Он поет: я не советский, я не кадетский, меня не трудно раздавить. А не стреляйте, не убивайте, цыпленки тоже хотят жить.